It's all right. It's okay. Um, yeah. So we have off Monday. So we are going to today. We're going to talk about some of the questions you guys did yesterday during the study guide. Right. Make sure we're all on the same page on that. Then we'll finish the French Indian War today, and depending on the time, we'll probably move on to the next part, which is going to be talking about the specific acts that the British were imposing. Okay. So let's first go over the worksheet. So take out the French Indian War study guide. We'll go over all the questions that we talked about from that point. So I know most of you did the video, right? The Ed puzzle, right? I adjusted the grades because I know once you complete it, it's all written, it says zero. And you're like, and I didn't get a zero. So I adjusted them, I graded them. So you should see a grade for yours, which will adjust your overall grade. So don't get all nervous. But let's first go over this part here. Okay. So I like to sometimes do these type of assignments because we've always done like a worksheet every single day, usually for almost everything. And sometimes there's certain topics that you can't necessarily have a document that goes along with it because there's no primary sources you should be analyzing. Like for instance, the French Indian War doesn't have a primary source, but the concept of what happens during the war and also the impact of the war is really important. So that's why I wanted to have some sort of a study guide so you guys can have this when you take a quiz or depending on, I don't even know what's going to happen with the AP, whether they'll be home again or not. Like I told my AP Gov kids, if you're home and there's no regulating what you have next to you, then there's nothing wrong with having something available. So let's just say the AP US history AP is the same thing as the AP Gov or even what you guys did last year. Well, sorry, the AP US did last year. Then you could have a study guide. Now, we'll see what happens. But this stuff is good for you guys to help you study. So when you take a look at this first map I posted, there is definitely a change. What is the change that you see? What's the biggest change you see? Yeah. Yeah, firstly, you can tell that there is now a contact, right, between the two territories. Originally, there wasn't really. I mean, this area right here was, but there was like a area where they were split. Okay. Now you can see a direct contact between two different groups. What else do you see that is a change from 1680 to 1750? Yeah. Yeah, like the eastern portion, or even to the Ohio River Valley, to the Mississippi, right? That is all now mainly settled. The West Coast, not so much, but from this point, really settled, right? And obviously, the French have taken complete control, right? Obviously, the British have the eastern coast, but everything else is really the French have dominated that area. The Spanish have obviously the lower southeast, southwest section, and the Latin America and South America, but the French really are dominating the North, really the United States general region, and even Canada as well. Anything else you would say, or is that kind of cover? Anyone else have another thing they want to add? All right. Can you predict how this might cause some problems? You kind of know, yeah. Yeah, at some point, when you want to expand and continue to expand in the way that you are, you're gonna have to make contact with somebody else at some point, right? Especially, we'll know when we get to. I kind of highlighted it, but Fort Duquesne, right? This is going to be a big, probably most important fort that kind of causes some issues, right? So yeah, you can predict that there's going to be conflict going on, and obviously you saw in the video there was conflict that did happen. Okay. All right, let's go to the next one. What were three major wars that occurred before the French Indian War, and then what was the reason for fighting these wars? So this was in the PowerPoint, right? This is not. Yeah, go ahead, Jordan. Yep. What was the third one? There's three. King George's War, right? So the King William's War, Queen Anne's War, and King George's War, right? Those are the three wars that you should have down. The first two, say again? It was King William's War, Queen Anne's War, and then the third one was King George's War. Okay. When you take a look at the PowerPoint, and I'll show you, talked about it right here, right? The first two, King William's War and Queen Anne's War, were basically their attempt was to try to take Quebec. They failed, and then King George's War was actually somewhat successful for the British. They had gained some trade routes in India because they had taken certain forts from the French, and they kind of made a deal. All right. In the second part, what was the reason for fighting these wars? Why did they fight these wars? Why did they fight these wars? Yeah. Yeah. No, perfect. It's basically the see who can gain more territory over somebody else, right? It's trying to dominate who can dominate the region, especially for trade, right? And then number 4, what were the mid-century challenges that caused conflict from 1750 to 1763? This is directly from the PowerPoint. This was from this slide, okay? That there's 3 major things you should know about this entire time period from 1750 to 1763. There's going to be 3 major themes that and I said this in the video, 3 major themes that are going to cause a lot of issues, right? The first one is that there's going to be constantly war going on between different groups, especially the Great War or the 7 Years' War, in which they call it. Secondly, there's going to be a lot of trade being boosted, so which makes a lot of people want to expand their trade connections in the New World, especially. And then lastly, Western migration from the colonists into new lands is going to cause some issues with natives and also other nations. Okay, so these are the 3 things that you should know that are going to cause a lot of problems, especially not even just in the French Indian War, but even when it comes to the Revolutionary, the War of 1812, and so on. Because these are the same 3 things that you can kind of connect to a lot of things that cause issues, right? What caused the war to occur in Ohio Valley, right? So this is really going to be when we start talking about the kind of the prequel to the war and how the war really started. So what was the prequel? Like what really happened to kind of start this conflict? Give me like a good little summary. What happened? What occurred? Don't remember. Yeah, Jordan.
The British found good trade in the Ohio Valley, so they gave this company, the Ohio Company, a bunch of money to set up settlements there.
Did they own? Did they own that land? The British?
No.
No, they didn't.
No, it was the French land.
Yeah.
And so the French were like, "This is our land, we're fighting for this now," and then war.
Yeah, basically, Jordan kind of summarized it perfectly. The fact is that traders from Virginia went to the Ohio Valley to try to trade with the native tribes of the area. They found that it was very, very successful. And the British saw how successful it was and said, okay, we'll give you like $200,000 in land grants to go and develop a colony in the Ohio Valley and trade with the natives of that area. Unfortunately for them, they didn't actually own the land to give money to. So when the French learned of this, they did a few things. First thing they did was develop a lot of forts on the top. So if you take a look at the top over here, they developed forts from Lake Erie all the way down to Fort Duquesne, which is in Pittsburgh, right? Just so that they can stop the British from expanding their land because they knew exactly what they're trying to do. If you fill that area with not only settlers, but they actually tried to get the certain Iroquois chiefs to populate the area to kind of control that spot, they knew that they would have gained another stronghold into their land, so they were trying to stop that from happening. So they obviously developed the forts in the area, and then they sent their troops to try to basically defend it. And also, they gained help from a lot of the native tribes that they had allied themselves with. So this caused conflict. Obviously, the British wanted to then impose their will and send over a very young, strapping, I will call the GOAT of the United States presidents, 22-year-old Lieutenant Colonel George Washington, to go try to take care of business. Unfortunately for him, he did not take care of business, and he had lost. okay, which had caused issues to start happening. And then we got started the war, right? So now we look at two documents here, right? And the first one is the Albany Plan of Union. Now, who proposed this in the first place? Who proposed this idea? Yeah, Caitlin. Ben Franklin, right? Ben Franklin was the one that proposed the specific idea at the delegation in Albany, right? That was called the Albany Plan of Union. So originally, guys, the delegation in Albany was met because the British were getting the butt kicked, all right? And they tried to come up with a plan in order for them to actually have some stability in the war. And now, obviously, Ben Franklin proposes this plan. And so the first thing is, what is the plan? Albany Plan of Union. Obviously, it's a plan to really unite the colonies in a specific sense. Now, what were some of the things of the plan that Ben Franklin had said? What was like the makeup of the plan? Yeah, Georgia.
I had like the points of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Like to manage trade, Indian policy, colonialism.
Who would do this?
They wanted to unite the colonies for representative, and the president general.
Yeah. So, what does that sound like? So there's a president. Yeah, John. It looks well. Specifically, it looks like our Senate because the Senate technically is headed by the vice president, right? If there's a tie vote, the VP then votes on behalf, and he's supposed to lead the Senate. Usually, on a lot of major laws being enacted, the VP would usually sit in on them, and he's supposed to be headed. So there's a president general that's leading this delegation of all the colonists, who they would vote for representatives to go to this delegation. Because then this delegation would then vote on taxes, they'd vote on military defense, help building forts, all these different things, right? Sounds just like our Senate today, right? Now, the other question, does it end up getting passed? No, right? Think of it this way. This idea would subvert power from Parliament. It'd be a direct, they'd have control over their colonies, but it'd be like, yeah, you guys can back us up. And they're like, yeah, no, we have complete control over you guys. And this idea basically says that you guys control yourselves, which is not a good thing for the British. So they said, no, that's not happening. Right? Now, when you take a look at this next document, this cartoon, this is a famous cartoon. You've seen this probably 100 times in any part of U.S. history. What is your opinion about this? What do you see? What does this mean? What does this mean? Yeah. Yeah, so first off, you can tell, right? They have all these different the abbreviations of the colonies are all here, right? And they're all pieces of the snake. And if they come together, they will win, right? What might help you understand why this cartoon is the way it is because there was a myth during this time period that a certain type of snake, if cut into pieces, if they put it together, it could reform and live again. That was a myth that was going on during this time. So it might make perfect sense to them, like, oh, why a snake? And why are they cut into pieces? And why are they trying to say if you join together, we'll live, but if we don't, we'll die? It's a myth that happened during that time. But basically, that's the concept of if these colonies can form together, unite, then they will be one being together and survive. If they don't, they'll just die. All right. So I kind of answered both questions there. Why is it cut into different pieces? They're trying to say they're all divided because that was the problem. The British were losing a lot because the colonies were kind of their own separate groups. And they were just waiting British orders to tell them what to do. So Ben Franklin was sitting there saying, well, listen, what if we all unite and have one single plan and we all can tell one group tells everybody what to do, then that'd be better off. But the British were like, nah, we're not good for that one. So I kind of mentioned this next question, how the war start for the British. It's pretty bad. Right, they were losing a lot. Specifically, one of the first major battles, General Braddock had basically.
Okay, there's children out in the courtyard. I want to make sure they're not disturbing your.
Oh yeah, you're good. Their General Braddock had died. There was like 2,000 troops of the British were killed. Really horrible loss for them. And then they had to replace him with William Pitt. Right. So what was his strategy? This is number 12. What was his strategy? William Pitt the Elder strategy. Yeah.
His strategy was to focus on the war that was going on in the world instead of in Europe. Because they figured if they could attack France's colonies
Yeah, perfectly. So when you look at the strategy, they thought France is getting all the resources from Canada. So he's saying, I'm going to let Prussia deal with them in Europe. And I'm going to focus all my energy in Canada. Because if you can cut off their resources, that means they can't fight as long as they would like, which also cuts away their money, which is really what ends up hurting them in the long run, right? So does that strategy work? Yes, it does. It works very well. So this next question, 13, probably got some people thrown off because they're saying, well, major locations. I kind of mentioned some battles or specific locations that are important, and they're all found on here, all right, on this slide. So the strategy that works slide talks about there are a few of them, and I'll circle them for you so you can see. So the first one I would say is Fort Duquesne, right? Because that first off, that was the first battle that occurred when they lost, with George Washington being there, and then they end up going back to taking Fort Duquesne and naming it Fort Pitt, right? The next one I would then mention is Louisburg, Fort Louisburg, because this is where they send Massachusetts Bay colonists to help them in their fight, and they send them to Louisburg, take this area on the top, which then sparks their next expedition into Canada, right? The next one then would be Quebec, because they travel from Louisburg to Quebec. After they take Quebec, that's where they enact the blockade. They now can stop entry into Canada through the St. Lawrence River, and it actually hurts them quite a lot, and then they finally go and attack Montreal. Right, so Montreal would be the last one. All right. So those are the four. So it's Duquesne, Louisburg, Quebec, and Montreal. That's basically how the strategy works, right? Find an entry into St. Lawrence River, then blockade the river so they can't get any resources out, which hurts them in the long run because they can't really sell anything if they have no resources to sell, right? Now, with that happening, they basically end up having their treaty, right? They end the war. Now, this treaty is not like the British obviously paid out. Like they got a lot of things to help favor them, but they ended up having, it was almost like a if you're into basketball, there's like a three-way trade between different teams. So what they had to do was, for the French to make up some of their money losses, they had to sell territories off to other nations as well. So one of the nations they had sold the Louisiana territory to was to Spain. Now, and they end up taking back the territory over time. I mean, that's how when we get to Jefferson, we buy Louisiana from the French, right? So they end up selling it for a certain amount of time, and they get it back later on. So when you look at the worksheet, it talks about what were some things that were given up or happened because of the treaty. This is where you should be finding it, right here, right? Now, so the British gained, obviously, all the land in Canada, and they had gained the Ohio River Valley, right? They also gained Florida as well. France, like I mentioned, had to give up the Louisiana territory to the Spanish. And the last thing that really did was it gave Britain really complete control over this entire eastern part of the New World. They were dominant in that area, right? Now, the fact that they had complete control over basically the Atlantic as well made them be they're already superpowers. They had the strongest navy in the world. They were a dominant army as well. But now you have all these resources from Canada all the way to the Ohio Valley. You're dominating the fur trade too. So you're making a lot of money, and they're doing well. However, we'll get into now the new material, right? So what were some long-term, or what were some short-term effects? So we'll get to that now, all right? So what I'll do is I'll stop periodically to help you guys answer questions on that study guide. It'll make your life a little easier for you. All right. So when you talk about the immediate effects, right, the biggest thing is that this gave Britain complete control. Right now they're living the great life. However, war does cost a lot of money, and Britain has been facing a lot of wars with France and Spain for a long time. We just talked about basically a 74-year period where they're constantly fighting somebody, right? So this costs a lot of money, and this caused a lot of problems. On top of that, they the other effects you can say is that the colonists for a time didn't have to worry about new invasions into the New World. And same thing with Britain. They didn't have to worry about new groups attacking them into their colonies because they had defeated probably one of the largest forces. It was a mixture of France, Spain, Austria, and even a lot of Native American tribes. So they kind of consolidated their control in the New World, right? So that's what I say here. Now, one of the biggest changes is going to be based on how the British view the colonists and how the colonists view themselves, right? And that kind of goes along with the next, that on the right underneath it has a little chart. That's where you're going to fill in this information, right? One of the first things we'll talk about is the British view on just the whole situation going on in the New World. Firstly, they have a really low opinion of the colonists. And the reason why is because the colonists were not trained whatsoever. You had some that were trained in the military, like obviously the GOAT, George Washington, right? He was trained at a very young age, being a lieutenant colonel at 22. It's pretty impressive for somebody. He was trained. He was a very good general down the line. But a lot of people were just common people. Like, they didn't have any sort of experience in warfare. They were just average Joes working on farms, and now you're going to war, right? And they just had a low opinion on them, as in they felt that they were not organized, they were not trained, and they felt as if they didn't contribute enough to the war effort. Okay, they were kind of seeing them as being too weak and too young to really do anything for themselves. And then they were annoyed that it felt like the British point of view is that they felt that they were doing everything and the colonists were just kind of just there for the ride, right? And they were convinced, because of how poorly trained they were, because of how unorganized they were, that they could not handle defending themselves. Because up to this point, they left them alone for a good amount of time, and obviously things kind of went wrong. So they said, yeah, you guys can't do this on your own. Now you take a look at the colonial view. Now, they were like, wow, we are awesome. We just defeated the French. We are so cool. And they're thinking so highly of themselves because they had part of a winning side. Now, I can understand that this is where perspective comes into picture, right? Depending on who you're talking to, they have a completely different perspective on the actions of the colonists. The British think they're horrible, the colonists think they're the best, but generally you look in the middle, right? There are some good organized movements, right? I think when you look at certain colonies, probably like in Virginia and you look at Massachusetts, they probably were the best of the colonies when it came to the warfare because they were picked most of the time to help the British. Other colonies, not so much, right? And certain circumstances, they were okay at defense. They didn't have a lot of experience in it, so that's why I can understand it's kind of in the middle, right? When you look at both views. Because of this nervousness from the British, right? They wanted to reorganize the empire. Really the empire, but really the colonies in general, right? They felt as if they needed to now take complete control of the colonies. And this is going to be a really big deal. Right? This is leading into all the stuff for the American Revolution, right? Because for a long time, they let them do whatever they wanted. And they felt as if they can't do that anymore because they are, in the British view, they're too stupid or too green to really defend themselves. So now they have to send a lot of troops over there and station themselves within the colonies to defend them from any sort of attack, right? Because understand, this is like an investment for the British. The colonies are now going to give them all their money. And after wars, they owe a lot of money. So they need to make sure that this transaction works perfectly. All right? So they want to impose now more taxes onto the colonists because they deem them to be not necessarily doing enough in the war effort. Okay? And this is obviously, we all know, this is going to cause a lot of problems. Right? So not only they feel they weren't ready to prepare themselves or defend themselves, they felt as if they owed them money, right? Because they weren't doing a good job or really weren't giving them money in the first place, enough money. So they want to increase taxes. And they wanted to basically be stationed there for a longer period of time. Sometimes they would be there for a certain time for just defense for a specific event, but now they're going to be there full time, right? So these are all things that you need to know when it comes to their reaction, right? So these are all kind of effects that you can say because of their nervousness about the colonies. Now, not only does the French Indian War get them nervous, but now the interactions with natives gets them even more nervous, right? This is a big event, and a lot of people they kind of look past this event sometimes. But Pontiac was a native chief that was in actually the city of modern day Detroit, all right? And he and his tribe were very close knit with the French. So what happens is this is kind of one of the first major events that happened after the French Indian War occurs. He ends up leading a revolt in Detroit and kills a lot of people. Because you have to understand, colonists were trying to migrate into the new area in which the British had controlled. They felt, wow, we won, let's go migrate, let's go take the land, let's go into these places, and Pontiac was not having it. Remember, Pontiac and his tribe were tight with the French, which allowed them to basically control that area without any problem from any French citizen, right? But now, all of a sudden, when they lose that war, the English want to take over and send people in there. He's not having that. So he starts going on a killing spree with a lot of different tribes. And this even causes issues for the British military to put down. It takes them a long time to really fully end this revolt. It takes 2 years to fully end this revolt that occurred. And at this point, the British were like, first, they're already like looking down on the colonists already. And now they're saying, so we just finished the war, and you guys went into the new world, the new colonies, and you start conflict with native tribes. And you couldn't even defend yourselves. We had to send British troops over, and they died. A lot of them died. Like, what are you thinking? So, the British impose a new act on them, which causes a lot of problems for the colonists, which angers them quite heavily, which is the Proclamation Line of 1763. Okay? And this is going to lead into a lot of issues going forward. This is like the point where the American Revolution idea begins. All right? And that's why this is a major event. This is a major event. The Proclamation Line, what it does is it basically creates an imaginary line. There's no actual barrier, but an imaginary red line that stops anyone, any English settler, to cross that line. And basically it even provides all, like, any, basically you can be arrested, jailed for life if you go into different territory. All right? This just causes a lot of problems with the colonists because of the sole fact that they wanted to migrate into new territory that they felt they deserved after winning the war. All right? So that's the most important thing. It causes resentment between the colonists and the British. And I apologize, it's small writing. For some reason, when I did design on the slide, it made like this box extremely small. I'll probably adjust that. But it caused a lot of problems between the British and the colonists because they wanted to gain the benefits, right? They felt, look at all this land. And you're not letting them take it? You're not letting us create territory? Nope. Not letting us take territory? Is there any questions on this proclamation line? So when you take a look at, and we'll go back to the worksheet because after this is basically the last part of the French Indian War. Okay, this is like the major last effect you should know for this first topic. Because from here we start to go into the different acts or taxes that are placed onto the colonists, and that'll be a whole new activity that we do. That activity is a pretty cool one, but it takes some time. We'll go over all the different acts that were placed on the colonists. We'll look at what were the acts themselves and what were the reactions. Because one thing you have to understand, there starts to see a trend. The British start to impose a tax. The colonists get really angry about the tax. Then they take away that act and then impose a new one. It's like every time. Like, all right, well, here's a tax. I'm angry about that. Okay, we'll take that away. Here's a new one. I'm angry about that. Same thing happens over and over until we start to get really conflict between the colonists, we're going to talk about the Boston Massacre, we talk about the Boston Tea Party. These are all things that show these incidents where colonists were in open, almost like open rebellion against the British to say we're not paying your taxes anymore. All right. Okay, so let's look at the worksheet and let's go over the info so we know that we're all on the same page here. All right, so we know the British view and colonial view, right? We know how they view themselves. What was Pontiac's Rebellion and what effect did it have on the colonies? So what was Pontiac's Rebellion? Where was it located? Yeah, Alec. In Detroit, right? In Detroit, they end up attacking Fort Pitt. Specifically, was one of the first locations they attacked, but they were basically an open rebellion against the British and were killing a lot of people, right? A lot of settlers, a lot of military, and it took 2 years for them to for the rebellion to get put down, right? And then we talk about the Proclamation Line of 1763 gets enacted, and how might this impact the colonies? This imaginary line. Kind of talked about it already. What was a big no-go? Yeah. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. They didn't want them to, first off, cause more issues with native tribes that were west of that line because they felt that they couldn't defend themselves. And they said, now that you guys cause issues, you get nothing. And they were okay with that, right? And we'll get into more. There's like that relationship where it's like a parent and a child relationship where the parent does not trust the child to do anything on their own, right? And you can understand that there's that weird. You've seen that relationship before, where the child thinks they could do more, the parent says no, you can't, and they start to butt heads. All right, so this is that relationship we see here. Any questions on that? You all good? So you can submit that if you want. Submit it now, so you don't have to worry about it for the weekend. And obviously, the other thing that's due tonight is the Ed puzzle, right? Make sure you do the Ed puzzle. That's going to summarize everything. It's like a 6-minute Ed puzzle, covers all the same stuff we just talked about, and then you guys are good for the weekend, right? I don't want it to give you a new assignment yet because we can do the acts, but I want to wait until you guys come back to do that, all right? Obviously, Monday we have off, but we'll start that probably on Tuesday. And I know Wednesday is the SAT as well. How many of you are taking the SAT? I think, isn't it like, I think the whole school's closed for Wednesday. I think I think everyone's working at it, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, I just wanted to see who's taking it. So what we'll do is we only have a few, 55, I think it ends? Yeah, 54. So what I'll let you guys do right now is work on your guides, those chapter guides. How many of you completed all of them? Well, at least chapter 4. Okay. So you can work on your chapter 4 guide. I'll give you guys that 5 minutes left to work on that, so you guys don't have anything to do this weekend. You can kind of enjoy your weekend. All right. Obviously, it'll take a little bit more than 5 minutes, but if you're almost done, you can finish that, and then we'll continue with this when we get back.